And welcome to the Smoke and Mirrors Radio Hour. My name is Jay Weidner, and we are here every Monday through Friday from 6 to 7, although I won't be here tomorrow night. We're going to replay Peter Levenda, a great show about the Nazis in South America, tomorrow night. Tonight, without further ado, because only really have about 40 minutes on this show in between the ads to really talk about stuff, and I got a guy I want to talk to, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to the infamous Cliff High of Half Past Human. And I don't know, do you have like a 3-minute way to explain what it is you do so we can get to the really good stuff, or should we just get to the good stuff?
Let's just get to the good stuff. I mean, people can go and Google webbots, you know. I'm tired of explaining it.
Exactly. That's how I feel about my Henday stuff. It's like, just go read it.
That's why you wrote the book, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So Cliff has awesome computer program which looks into things, and he's been able to predict events, and go Google him and you'll find it out. But what we're here to talk about tonight is Cliff's kind of piggybacked his theory on top of Patrick Gerald's and a little dash of Henday and some Carl Kalaman and put it together and come up with a rather evocative explanation for 2012. And although I try to stay on the positive, I cannot deny what you are saying because your numbers are coming out right, and that's what worries me, is when the math comes out right. So why don't you tell us? Yeah, tell us about the sun. Let's start with the sun, because everybody that listens to this program knows about how concerned I am with what's going on with the sun right now, and I think your explanation may be the one we've been looking for.
Well, there's my data had always suggested that we were dealing with magnetics at a level that we could barely understand, and so I was always looking at the sun for some kind of an issue there, and unfortunately I followed the same trail as almost everyone else and postulated something external to the solar system. However, Patrick Gerald's work provides a mechanism within the sun itself that accounts for everything that we're seeing, from the interplanetary problems, from the individual planets having the climate issues, and so on, and they all come back to the sun and a natural periodic cycle. And basically, it's an issue of the sun's magnetics wind themselves up into a tizzy over about 11,500 years, and then they've got to decide, okay, we're going to blow off all this extra energy, and they do it all at once. And that's fundamentally Gerald's approach, and I just added a few things there that seem to make sense and also allow for the prediction of some other items associated with it.
So basically what we have here is a 37-day rotation cycle on the sun.
On the poles. And
on the poles.
The
which
poles
would be its natural cycle.
Yeah, it should determine how fast the whole sun rotates in total. But it doesn't, because the sun has 98% of the mass and 1% or so of the angular momentum, and the planets, while they have very little mass relative to the sun, they only have about 1% of the mass in the solar system. They have 99% of the angular momentum. So they're dragging the sun's equator around and lapping the pole every 87 days. And apparently, if you do this over the course of 11,500 years, more or less, it gets to the point where it starts manifesting as we see it. And it kind of makes sense. In my lifetime, the sun has changed from its mellow yellow to its current intense white, and then sometimes it seems to be shading over slightly into blue. And this would be a known effect that we see within small magnetic containment vessels that are messing around with plasma. And these small containment vessels formed by giant magnets are called tokamaks. And if you get your magnets out of alignment, you get the magnetic containment vessel all distorted, and the plasma inside escapes, and normally you have just lost a laboratory, but you learn from your lessons. And it appears to be generally the same kind of an effect that's occurring on the sun. And we have to acknowledge that even NASA has come out recently and said they haven't got a clue as to why the sun's behaving this way. You know, it should have been this, but no, it didn't do that. You know, it should have been into cycle 24 with some intensity, but if it's because they figured it was going to peak in 2012. And if it's going to do that, it should have started really getting active 2 years ago, which it did not.
In fact, the opposite happened.
Correct. Now, in my theory here, or in my addition to Gerald's work, it kind of makes sense that this would occur, that we'd have an absence of sunspots, because basically what occurs to create a sunspot is the coincident alignment of one of the magnetic lines of force being bent by the pull of the planets and sort of crawling up over the face of the sun, and it coincidentally aligns at 19.47 degrees of latitude with a structure internal to the sun itself. And if there is no alignment with the structure, no sunspot is formed at that magnetic alignment point. If there is, the two hook up together for this internal rotation of the sun, approximately 26 degrees, and we would see the sunspot appear, be dark, which really is a cooling in the sort of elbow, if you will, of the magnetic bend, and it would rotate around the planet as that bend wound its way up and towards the pole. And then ultimately, though, in the sense of many windings of cloth around a croquet ball, ultimately you get to the point where those windings are all now below the 19.47 degrees, and you should have an absence of sunspots. In fact, it should continue in a real sense until the absolute blow-off of all this external energy. And it may indeed be even the last countdown, so to speak, when all the sunspots shift over to a very chaotic kind, not a usual kind at all, but something that will erupt in a few hours and disappear. And these are predictable, and they would be occurring because the individual magnetic lines of force are not able to wrap themselves around the sun anymore, but they could still twist internally, thus briefly exposing holes in the sun's intense magnetic envelope around it and creating an illusion, so to speak, of a sunspot. And so if we get to that level where we've got these chaotic kind of eruptions all over the sun, I would be able to say that, all right, we're in, X number of days of the final blow-off of this external energy. And it should be quite predictable from that point forward.
So we're looking for sudden and fast magnetic storms that come and go quickly. And when that starts happening on a daily or a weekly basis, we know we're getting close to the blow-off of this thing, which could result in what?
Well, which will result in a giant magnetic sphere headed outward. There are some questions as to whether the magnetic sphere would be of a uniform nature or a rather haphazard nature in terms of, how much magnetism in what area of the sphere as it expands. But within some general constraints, that sphere should be fairly equally magnetically active, and it should erupt out well beyond the orbits of the inner planets, and that we're in the inner planet category, and that may include us. And if that happens, then Earth is going to get hit with a wave of magnetism that may be so large and so intense that humans and other life would feel it as a form of gravity as it sort of went through the planet. And in its very most severe form, if it happens to be of a negative or southern polarity, it would cause a pole shift in our magnetic pole, which may result in a crustal shift as well.
Well, my Caro friends in the Andes Mountains tell me that what they predict is a term is called Pachacuti, which means the world turned upside down. And I asked them what they saw happening around 2012, and they said, well, we're really going to miss our white brothers.
Well, we're going to miss them too, I'm sure.
Well, I think they have plans.
Well, it kind of makes sense, too. I mean, this sort of thing happening periodically. Gerald's math is very precise. It makes sense if you imagine that there's this rather complex nature of the sun that gets all whipped up and maintains this state for a while, 11,000 some odd years. Then you can look back and say, if that kind of thing occurs and you get the giant waves that Gerald thinks would occur, then living in places like Machu Picchu make a whole lot of sense. And that's why they went to the trouble to create such.